Good. Hello, world. Anybody who's watching, I'm Kristine Bentz, and I am a Tucson-based life cycle celebrant and home funeral guide. And I'm here at our Southwest Celebrant Gathering today, December 9th, 2010. And really just excited to be in this room with such a stellar array of talented women and sharing about my experience most recently with a home funeral where I served a family, and really it was unique and a pure joy for me because I got to serve the family through the dying process and the whole continuum, as is my greatest call, to work through that dying, the work of dying and the grace of dying, into the care of the body after death and supporting the family in becoming their own funeral director and not having to work with a funeral home at all. And in some cases for little pieces of it, but as necessary for them. And then into the community-wide celebration of life too. So I think I'll start at the experience of that, which illustrates things so well, and then go into the broader movement. If that sounds okay.
Sure.
So I received my training as a life cycle celebrant in 2009, and then decided through a series of great, divine accident, right? You say it's accident, truly it's not, though. Living here in this co-housing community where we're having our gathering today, a woman 2 doors down from me was very actively dying and just said, "Kristine, you're going to figure out how to handle this," and had always been our crone and led our ceremonies, and before she died handed me her saguaro rib walking stick and said, "You're in charge of ceremonies now."
Oh.
Just put her hand on my shoulder, So, so that's big, because that was about 2 years ago, this past weekend actually. And so a group of us women, as we know, I think in our very DNA, rallied together and cared for her in her dying process and her after her death. And then we had a completely natural burial for her and her shroud, which she made herself.
Really?
So that's how I was called to do this work. That was happening simultaneous to me getting my celebrant certification, and it catapulted me into this realization of that's why I'm on this earth to do the work. And so I went for training as a death midwife and a home funeral guide, and have since received all of that from Final Passages in Sebastopol, California.
Okay.
From Jerry Grace Lyons. And she is kind of the West Coast guru of the home funeral movement, as Elizabeth Knox is the East Coast guru of the home funeral movement. And Jerry Grace is a divine presence and has led about 350 home funerals herself. So she's a great font for anyone who wants to find a teacher. So that led me to being in Tucson and serving families here. The most recent family I served, I did provide care to the great grand dame of the family. Her name was Ruth, and she just had a bigger than life presence. We should say things like, "Oh, darling," just really great presence. And she was done with her body. 93, ready to leave. Physically, spiritually, psychosocially, emotionally, had a lot of work to do still. Was not in a place where she had a terminal diagnosis. Hospice came and did an evaluation. Didn't really see that she was fit for hospice because she didn't have the terminal diagnosis, which is you need. She had early stage Alzheimer's. Family decided to keep her at home and have palliative care there. And decided, I think, which is really, compassionate and enlightened on a family's behalf, to see, okay, we have all these caregivers providing physical care. what about that dimension of our other bodies, you know?
Uh-huh.
I really believe that we have story bodies, ethereal bodies, psychosocial, emotional, you know, bodies that are a part of our existence that don't have to do with wiping our behind after we go poop.
Yeah.
You know, and caregivers that you hire for the aging are most often oriented to that, keeping the ends clean and dressed, and you know, the real physical elements that are so important. But I helped with that spiritual piece and showed up, like we were talking about, Marilyn. You know, every week for 2 and 3 hour sessions, and didn't come with an agenda. Didn't ever come with an outcome that I expected. Really just did companion her. Would often sing, pray, chant, visualize, draw, you know, just be present. Read stories like Skeleton Woman from, you know, the woman who ran with wolves. 'Cause Skeleton Woman is such a great story of transformation. Just awesome story. And I think was her turning point. Are you familiar with the Skeleton Woman myth?
Mm-hmm.
It's excellent, and I recommend it highly for anybody working in transformation and especially death. The Skeleton Woman essentially comes back up out of the sea after having that being where she dies and is entangled in fishing nets, and she has to go through a series of things to disentangle herself. And a lot of times when we're dying, we're disentangling ourselves. You know, there's disentanglement, right, and there's dissolution, because our physical beings, our elemental selves, are going through states of dissolution. So we spent a lot of time with the disentanglement idea, and she did the work of disentangling herself. Forgiveness. A lot of work around forgiveness. Dictating thank you notes to me. Dictating forgiveness letters to me. If now I'm working with to write and send to people in sealed envelopes. Stories. Calls. Picking up people. Many of these people, it was the last time they would hear her voice. Her family really thought she would, you know, stay for a while longer. And she died on November 8th. And I got the call at 9 o'clock in the morning. Mom died, and I said, okay, I'll be there in an hour. And we took care of her body. Family led all of the care, and I support. So Home Funeral Guide is to support, not ever to direct, you know, take a real physical forefront role, but to have all the supplies, to have all the lists, to have all the sequencing, to understand when to stand back and, you know, get out of the way, to understand when to gently support and provide guidance. And the family acted as their own funeral director and cared for herself, and then had a home funeral that night. And Ruth's body was in her bed. She died in her bed at home, which is such an amazing way to go, I think. And everybody from the neighborhood could come over, you know, and visit her and sit with her as they wished, in quiet with candlelight. And she was, of course, all naturally present, no embalming or anything.
Did the family wash her?
Yeah, the family did. Yeah, the family took care of all of that. Yeah.
I don't quite understand this washing business. It must be symbolic because you're not dirty.
You are.
You are dirty?
You defecate and urinate all over yourself after you die. And some people, you know, depending on the nature of life support or not that's happening, you have IVs to remove, you have a lot of prior application of medications to wipe clean. So there are a few levels of it, really, Carolyn, because it is in large part that final act, especially for a family that's been so highly participative in the caregiving process. You know, it's their last time they'll wash that person's face, or, you know, behind their ears, or just anything that has been a routine for them that's become, you know, a very daily activity. And then there's the part of, you know, if you're in pajamas, you are soaked with urine, and depending on whether or not you've eaten, you know, defecation. So you have to, depending on the stage of rigor mortis, cut the clothes off and remove out all the bedding and everything that's soiled, and then wash the body. So there are a few layers there. Yeah. Is there something else about that?
No, that
Seems-
answers my question.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
How long do you need to be using dry ice right away, or do you have a certain, you indicated that in this case, the funeral took place that night.
mhm,
So was there any further
mhm.
preparation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because in different states, every state law differs, and if you do this work, one of the very first things you need to know is obviously all the state law. It can easily be romanticized. Just like I think celebrancy can really be romanticized too. If you look at both of them in a parallel way, it's true how you have to pay attention to the legal details. And in the case of a home funeral vigil, our state law in Arizona, you need to have the refrigeration within 24 hours or embalming. So the dry ice goes in, underneath the body in the abdomen only, up, to within that day-long window. So at night, I packed the underneath of her abdomen with dry ice. And then it can stay up to 6 days, really. So the amount of ceremony that comes into that, as a celebrant with this training, the whole continuum to me is really ceremony, because I see it that way. It's the lens, right, that I'm looking at it through, and yet there are these little pieces that are more ceremonial than others. Whenever I prepare the big bowls of water, I put in flowers from the yard. I put challenge. Yeah. So anyway, that part about what's in the water is where we were. The native herbs are really wonderful to have, like creosote, like we know is such a great cleansing smell too for desert dwellers. You know how smell is such a big piece, like we've been picking sage here today, is such a big piece of that sacred space, if you choose to use the word sacred, the oils. And I usually have a little basket of oils that I let the family choose from. Does this work for you or not? Lavender or eucalyptus or sandalwood, and each have their different properties. Some are centering, some are calming, some are restorative. So all of that goes into the thought process behind creating that kind of reverent space. If sacred's not,
reverent space.
If sacred's not a word you want to use, there's so much to language. Yeah, and so we were just mentioning too about the idea of separation and transition and incorporation from Ben Gennett, and how uncannily, really, that fits the trajectory of a home funeral too. And the place, you could easily see that separation is the moment of death, right? And transition is all that space in between where you're making decisions and getting the declaration of, the pronouncement of death, and washing the body and moving the body and doing all this gathering together of supplies, and then having the body lie in grace, as we call it, and be present for people to be with. In the home environment, that transition space is so much radically different than the experience that I think many of us have had of ambulance, sheriff, or morgue, or funeral home, whoever is called, coming in the white van and sometimes with the body bag, and sometimes very gently they do so, withdraw the remains with a blanket or whatever. So, but the family, if they choose to have this experience, it's such a different process, that transition piece.
Who signed the death certificate? How did that get handled?
The death certificate in our state has to be signed by either the attending physician or the medical examiner. And now it's changing so that naturopaths can sign if they're on the state register, and as of January, physician's assistants. In this case, we had the pronouncement of death happen by paramedics that came.
I see.
Without their sirens. I always say, please, this is not an emergency. Death is not an emergency. We do not need sirens. We do not need to draw the whole neighborhood over, please leave your sirens off.
Interesting
come over
point.
and
Very interesting point.
do the pronouncement of death. if you call 911, they'll come with blaring noise, and you don't need it. So if you call and ask that they come to pronounce a death specifically, it's a different story. So the paramedics came, pronouncement of death, faxed everything to the physician. You have to have seen that physician within 30 days. This is getting kind of to the technical stuff. When it's in hospice care, your hospice medical director, physician, or comes in, and can do that pronouncement. And so that's all you need in the medical certification of death to take to the Office of Vital Records to get all the worksheets done for having your disposition transit permit, everything you need to handle the remains as a responsible person as opposed to a funeral director. That's how our state law is written. It's funny. Responsible person.
Yes, responsible. How about the ceremony? Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that something you?
Sure. Yeah. And I think there is that piece where the home is open, and that's part of the incorporation. With the home funeral vigil. That
yes,
I loved it because as I was leaving, and I knew I had done everything to support the family I could at that point. It was a 12-hour day, and it's solid. You rest when you go pee. Or you withdraw to just give the family the space they need, Having that attunement is really important. And when I was leaving, there were kids coming in, there were people of all races coming in and ages, and, just really so different of a window into death than...
Interesting. Well,
than is the sense you have in other settings.
So you didn't hang around for the visitation?
No, I didn't need to. Yeah, it's really the families. I stayed to have some dinner with them because I was ready to eat my hand. So we had some excellent Thai food and drank wine, and at that point there's laughter, there's tears, there's the whole gamut of expression and array of emotions.
Where did they have her laid out?
On her bed. We stripped all the sheets and everything, and then laid out beautiful blankets. We dressed her in favorite pink suit,
nice.
And fixed her hair and put really nice pink lipstick, and the family is choosing this and leading this and doing this. I'm just there gently supporting them. So she looked beautiful in her death. Looked really beautiful.
People coming in, like the neighbors, the kids would come in, you'd gather a little bit. Would they gather them a little bit at a time, or people? How would that work?
She actually lived in a casita behind the house, much like where you stayed last night, Marilyn. And so everybody, as they wished, would go into the casita, and it was totally decked out in fresh flowers, bouquets of flowers and candles, and it's really nice. Some of her favorite music playing. And,
that's so nice.
And so it's really beautiful. It smells good. It smells so beautiful at that point in time too. So that is a really great opportunity, I think, for organic ceremony to happen, and organic rites to happen around that scenario, very natural scenario. So I helped, and then they transported her body to Missouri themselves for burial there. And when they came back, I supported them in the celebration of life. That was a big community-wide party and celebration of, her 93 years. So I just helped put together the outline at a community center.
And everybody, friends and family, went there. Did you have her ashes or anything? Or no, she was buried.
She was buried.
Natural burial. Okay.
So did you actually have a service, or was it just eating and drinking and talking?
No, we had a service too. Yeah, we made a big remembrance tree, and the family had started by putting down, stars and hearts and leaves and shaped things. They wrote some of her favorite sayings, and then people were welcome to write down their favorite things she would say, kind of like the little booklet you just had, Marilyn, and put that up on the tree. There was a drumming circle, and everybody kind of focused their energy on that drumming circle, and then the family transitioned to that space where the music was coming from, and I sat up with the family and helped them lead, a celebration that we'd worked out the details of before. And we had the order of speakers, and I just helped them with an order of ceremony, and then I did little things like the blessing, and they spoke, and then I led a kind of, I don't know if any of you have done this before, but it's kind of like, I call it popcorn, where you say, okay, everybody has memories of Ruth, and if there's a DVD playing of pictures, this works really well to say, just let's all stop for just a moment of silence and just look at this, you know, representation of her, or there's pictures on the tables or whatever. And that's a nice, poignant moment, you know. And then I say, what comes to mind? They go ahead and say it out loud. Everybody, you know, at the same time, it's like popcorn. It's just all over, you know. They say what they think and what they remember of her, you know, or him. And that's a good segue into storytelling time, too, because then people are already a little bit talking, and it's less of a focus at the front, and people feel that sense of participation and community out in the group, too. And I always have something that's meaningful to the person who transitioned for the speaker to hold once we go into storytelling time.
Ah, very nice.
Kind of like a talking stick,
talking stick,
but something that is important to that person who transitioned, because then they understand, I'm not going to be able to, you know, stand here for 40 minutes and talk. It gives an idea of, I need to pass this on to the next person who wants to tell
very
a story.
good idea. That's very actually,
So
I like it.
that works well, yeah.
Was there anyone in the family who was reluctant to go through this process, or who asked questions or stood in the way?
Some family was long distance, and some of the family on the receiving end in, you know, the other state was in more of a Catholic tradition, and so they did have that. They did have their Catholic traditions honored too. So no one really got in the way. No, as getting in the way might be, you know, thought of. But there are questions and there are concerns, and it's good to allay those concerns too, because that's
Part of the
really
process,
natural.
right?
It's part of the process, yeah. And I find the more that you're familiar with the laws, the more that you're familiar with all the stuff that's, you know, the getting down in the weeds stuff, the more you can just soothe any concerns, because if you have the answers right like that, this section of the code and this section of the statutes, and, you know, all of the people that they can call, and I have contacts that they can ask questions and back up what I'm saying too, which is important for us in anything we do, not just home funeral guidance, I think.
How do you work with someone in the other state if they've transported this body across state
good
lines?
question.
Did they need to have the equivalent of a transport permission in the other states they're crossing?
Just in the county of origin.
How do you transport a body across other states?
In a van or a truck.
With rides?
She, the family in this case decided to have a wake and a visitation on the other end. So before she left the state, the family decided to have her embalmed, and that's part of that. You know, did anybody have objections or anything, you know? And the only thing that happened with that was most states have requirements where you either have to have a hermetically sealed container or embalming for transport to occur. And she could have remained unembalmed in a hermetically sealed container. The family wanting to have that wake and the visitation on the other end, that didn't meet their needs. So that's how the family came to a middle way.
Interesting.
So there's always, you know, every one of these stories as they unfold is going to be very different. Another family I've helped build their own coffin in the garage, you know, and took the remains directly to the cemetery for committal, and I helped them with the ceremony at the committal too.
The building one's own coffin, that's really an amazing experience, wasn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's a beautiful experience. I mean, if it involves cremation, you can have the family and grandkids and whoever participate in decorating the cardboard box. If it's a family who only wants a cardboard box as a part of the, you know, story. And I have the DVD. If we have time, I can show it, of a family who decorated the woman's box. She loved peacocks, so the whole box is this elegant, beautiful peacock, you know. So there are so many ways that that people can express their truest, you know, inner kind of contributions, you know, sincerest and truest and most active contributions in those moments after death. And it can be 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. For some people it's, you know, 4, 5, 6 days. 6 days is on the long end of a home funeral.
Okay.
So that's really some vignettes, from a couple of those experiences, and I think in the broader movement, if you want me to talk to that too, at the National Home Funeral Alliance, where I spoke and addressed the topic of celebrant as a bridge.
And when was that? And where was it?
It was in Boulder, Colorado, at the second annual National Home Funeral Alliance
It's a
conference.
new thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the first real pilot get together was last year, before they had even filed as a nonprofit. So this was truly their first year as this formal nonprofit.
And more or less, when was that?
It was October 27th, I think, 28th.
Yeah, a little while ago.
Yeah.
2010.
Was that right? Something like that, yeah. Sorry if I'm
You
blanking
need
out.
to-
It's okay.
Yeah, so, at the end of October.
It's okay, we got it.
Yeah, and I think there were probably about 125 people there, 150 people, which was a good attendance for the first formal year. And the biggest sense I get from that gathering of, like we talk about the celebrant tribe, I really feel like there's a natural death tribe too, and there really is this paradigm shift occurring.
Mm-hmm.
There really is, I think, a tipping point, and some people really attribute it to the baby boomers. Some people really attribute it to people just having a, triple storm of heightened environmental consciousness and tough economic times, and just the emotional healing that can happen, like a little trifecta that's happening: emotional, economical, and environmental. I think, though, that it's mostly just time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just time for us to do this, to reclaim these kinds of rights for ourselves, and look at ceremony as an opportunity for healing. That it doesn't have to be heavily scripted and delivered by someone of importance, that's at a place higher than us in some kind of a social or religious or organizational hierarchy. We can do this work ourselves, as a family, and as someone that's a friend or a relative or a celebrant, that's like a lay chaplain in a way,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, just coming to the work saying, how can I be a vessel, and that's what I pray every morning to do, is just to be a vessel for people to express what they need to and have the peace and healing they need around whatever it is that their milestone might be, especially death.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the people at the conference are, everybody has a pretty great dark sense of humor, which I love, because you have to. And the president of the, executive director of the Funeral Consumer Alliance talked at length, was the keynote speaker, and is hilarious. I would strongly recommend him for any kind of wisdom gathering around, if there ever becomes specific gatherings for the celebrancy movement around death. He's fantastic.
Okay, that's good to know.
Wickedly intelligent and hilarious. And Josephine Speyer from the Natural Death Center in the UK also spoke. And I'm wondering if that's where you were in that story you told last night at the Natural Death Center. Because of the way that the UK really started the natural burial and woodlands movement, before us. And she really pointed out...
I think it was the Woodlands movement.
Yeah.
That's the group.
You were there, I think, which is fascinating to me. Yeah. She pointed out that it's really a Quaker, in a spiritual tradition. So really a lot of this is just reclaiming the work. And there's a really great spirit around that at the conference, And in a sense, I feel like we as celebrants are reclaiming work of, the parish priests, how parish priests are just out in the village ministering to people in the community as they need it, as they need the assistance. And so it's fascinating to me how parallel the tracks are with the home funeral movement and celebrancy. And there's a great marriage.
Did you talk with, did you have a speaking engagement there?
Yes,
Okay.
I did. I had a speaking engagement about, this topic of the role of celebrant in a home funeral. Mm-hmm. And really spoke to the issue of, what is ceremony and how do we serve families, and how do we hold the space in order for the family or the community or individuals to have the healing that they need in that moment, because of how funerals and memorials and celebrations of life are not for the person who died. It's for everybody standing there that's, still present.
Okay, bring this back to the real world. How do you charge for a service like that?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to say I work on a retainer basis. I think I need my water or that blue glass behind you. Really. I work on a retainer basis for that companioning and spiritual care piece. Mm-hmm. So if someone says, okay, we'd like 4 visits in a month, and you average 2 to 3 hours per visit, you can say, whatever your hourly rate is, and I say a retainer basis of $200 to $350 a month for companioning. Speaking engagements and in-service trainings with hospice and different organizations, I'll do gratis always for that opportunity to have awareness building. And then for the pre-need, I'll do a 2-hour consultation gratis with a family to explain what a home funeral is, what it looks like, what the law is, mm-hmm. what their work is if they're going to choose this, mm-hmm. And then give them all my fee information so they can make a choice. So similar to us with, any other ceremony, weddings, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Let's have a no obligation meeting, and you can learn about what services I offer and the value I provide, and then you can decide what you need. And in Arizona at this time, I charge $450 for a basic home funeral, or I'm sorry, $475, and that's when I'm just assisting, and the family doesn't act as their own funeral director, but I'm assisting in that piece of the continuum before a funeral home comes in or something like that. So just maybe it's at a hospice and they have 4 hours after time of death to do mm-hmm. ceremony there, or it's at home or whatever. And then for the full service package of home funeral support, where I help them file all the paperwork and mm-hmm. do everything from death to committal or cremation, it's $950. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. How does that compare to what these funeral directors get? And that must be a lot cheaper.
It is. Uh-huh. It is, and it kind of depends on what you are looking at in their full price list. Mm-hmm. Most of the funeral homes around here are charging just $1,200 to $1,500 for getting the paperwork done.
Mm-hmm.
Just
nothing.
So that's a piece of what they offer that many people know they can do themselves. Funeral homes have that and charge a lot for it, and it's something that families can do for themselves. Mm-hmm. Depending on what state they're in, it may be that they're just completely obliterated by the death, and they're exhausted or they're emotionally drained and can't even leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be an option.
Yeah.
There's such a range of what's mm-hmm. possible for people. But it is, a home funeral can be anywhere from 10% of a whole funeral home bill to half of the funeral home bill. It just depends.
Yeah.
It just depends on what the family chooses.
Got a question. What can you tell celebrants? You might have to repeat my question on the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell celebrants about the Home Funeral Alliance? Should they go meet with them in their state? How were you received by your presentation of celebrants? Was it something new to them that they didn't know about? Did they know about our organization? How would they want to integrate it? Is it a group friendly? Is it a good marriage
absolutely.
between us and them? It seems like it is. But what would you say to celebrants out there that would be interested in possibly, from your experience speaking to them, and then what they should do and also?
Yeah, so what I would say to celebrants who are interested in looking at the National Home Funeral Alliance and maybe membership or just talking to folks is that it's a great opportunity for building bridges, like I talked about, into not only just the natural death care, but some funeral directors were there. People who are realizing this emergence and this new demand for bringing care back into our own families and communities, So it's not you know, the Home Funeral Alliance is a wide array of people. As a celebrant going to meet someone there at a conference or local regional gathering, you can meet hospice, you know, social workers. You might meet funeral directors. You may well meet, you know, caregivers, the physical caregivers. You might meet lay chaplains from hospitals. You may meet this range of people that otherwise might be hard to kind of winnow down and identify in your community, you know. And it's mostly people in the National Home Funeral Alliance who are interested again in that whole continuum, the dying into death, after death, and then care and memorialization of the family afterward. So the social worker, the caregivers, you know, in our society, the way we've handled death for so long, we've really tended to divide that continuum.
Yes.
It's very much, you know, and a lot of funeral directors I talk to say, I don't want anything to do with the dying. I just don't want to, I don't want to come near a hospice. You know, you hospice people walk on water and give me a dead body. I know exactly what to do, you know, and so we're really kind of segregated. And I think that's part of our challenge, what arises around that blocked opportunity for separation and the transition space in between into incorporation too. It comes back to that. So what I love about the National Home Funeral Alliance is there's a lot of people existing in that whole continuum.
Sure.
You know, that whole area that a lot of people just want to tread in one part of it. Or they're only comfortable or have training in treading in one part of it, you know. And I was received extremely well as a celebrant and a home funeral guide, you know, because I received all my training and done the work of a few home funerals. I think that it was really fascinating after the session I did. Probably about 40, 45 people were present, which surprised me. I think I told you because my session, there were concurrent sessions, you know, the whole day, and my session was opposite two of the stars, you know, two headliners, Elizabeth Knox and Shar Barrett.
Yeah.
Shar Barrett is a funeral director in Washington who is also a home funeral guide and bases her practice in natural care. And so I thought, you know, if two people showed up, I was going to be so happy.
Yeah.
And here in the room of 45 people, and a lot of the people who came up afterward said, you know, I'm in training to be a funeral director. And your presentation made me think completely differently about how to work with and approach that space with families.
Interesting.
In the pre-need section as well as the after-death
that
section.
That right in between, it straddled both.
Yeah. So that was really great to hear, right? Because I care so much about the families and the individuals who are going through that piece. And if we can come to it with a more aware mindset, then I'm really happy. I was really happy to hear that. And people working in hospice were happy to hear about celebrants too, always, I think. Especially the social workers and the chaplains. Yeah, they're happy to hear about celebrants and the work that we can do prior to death as well as after death. Again, that whole spectrum. Is that answering your question?
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and just all super, you know, fantastic people.
That's
A
great.
lot of love. When you're with death a lot, you're more alive.
It's true. I agree with you.
Woo! This moment right here is so great, you know.
Yeah,
and
it's
so
true.
everybody's a little woo. and you kind of magnify it when you're all together. You know, it's like a big party. So it's really great, really great, inspiring folks. And next year the conference is going to be in Boulder. Yeah,
Boulder,
sponsored
so
by
we can-
Natural Transitions. So it's going to be a great conference again, I think. And what else can I tell you?
I would love to go. I think that
Yeah,
Dory and I were talking about that. Yeah.
yeah. You know, you can meet someone like Josie. He presented a session on the movement with Green Burial, and I think it would really. I don't know if you've talked to him before, but you know, how he's working is similar to how you're working with celebrancy becoming mainstreamed. You know, because Green Burial becoming mainstreamed, it's taking some time and it'll build on itself. The place he's gaining the most traction is with funeral homes.
See, that's interesting.
And where he set out, you know, his target audience and where he thought he'd get the most traction, was with land trusts.
Hmm.
Because conservation burial is so well suited to land preservation
I see.
and land restoration. You know, green burial is such a good fit for, you know, restoring landscapes, replanting, you know, prairie grass or prairie flowers, or if it's trees or whatever the restoration might be. It's such a good match. He's finding the best reception with funeral homes.
Funeral homes, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting.
It is. It's fascinating. And he is a fantastic guy. Fantastic. Yeah. He developed a thing that I think is really interesting too, where he's gotten tired of flying all over the country because people want to talk to him all the time, you know, and they're curious and they want to learn, but it was costing a lot.
Yeah.
And not good for the organization's carbon footprint.
Right.
So he developed a webinar and presents it in person. So he's, you know, it's not just like a webinar that somebody buys and they watch it without any accompaniment from a green
So it's
burial
on like
site.
on the computer or
Yeah,
something?
and he's
live
running
with
it, and he does live Q&A and everything.
Yeah.
So he does that with a lot of funeral homes and nonprofits that are around land conservation, maybe not land trusts, but park reserves and, you know, different places on that whole land conservation spectrum. So he's come to the work now after being in this area for 8 or 9 years with some real ingenuity.
That's great.
Yeah, that's good cross-pollination ingenuity, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So does that help?
Yeah.
That was more longer than you probably needed. But
Does anybody have any questions?
yeah, I'm happy to answer more questions. And part of what I'm doing too is having a natural death care group here in Tucson, and we meet
Okay.
here every
Through
month.
meetup.com, or how do you use that? Can you kind of
Meetup.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody who's looking at, you know, special topics in celebrancy, I think it's a great way to meet people and to develop a sense of camaraderie, you know, and communication, regular communication.
That's good.
So that's it.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a little less than half an hour.